Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. We've got another really fun episode for you this week. Ronald Malfi is here. We're going to talk about Ronald's new book, Senseless. We're going to talk about crime fiction and horror fiction, and we're going to talk about Poltergeist. That's right, the legendary Poltergeist, a scare that shaped all of us born in the last 55 years. It's a great time, great chat, great to get to know Ronald a little bit. We're going to get you to that in just a second. But first, I wanted to highlight something that I wrote this week. If you are interested in the scares that shaped me, your humble host, I wrote a piece about a video game called The Seventh Guest, which was a PC game that came out in the early 90s and is still very well regarded in the PC gaming world, that scared young Matthew half to death, kept me up nights, made a huge impression on me, and helped to turn me into a horror fan. So if you want to read a little more about one of the foundational scares for ya boy, head over to popheist.com, check out that piece. There are links to it on my socials and on the podcast socials. It's a lot of fun. And while you're over there, subscribe to Pop Heist. It's a writer-owned outlet. We are doing our best to churn out some cool content that isn't dictated by algorithms, some unexpected fun stuff, like writing about PC games from 1993. If you're into that, go check them out. It's a lot of fun. That's it for me rambling this week. Let's head over to our interview with Ronald Malfi. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is the Bram Stoker nominated author of books like Floating Staircase, Blackmouth, The Narrows, and Small Town Horror. His new novel, Senseless, is in bookstores everywhere April 15th. Ronald Malfi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. This is great.
It's my pleasure. It's great to talk to you. I have been devouring Senseless over the past few days. I am not a person who's good at reading in crowded places. I get easily distracted, but I opened that thing in an airport waiting for my flight last week and just got sucked in. And before I knew it, 100 pages of it were gone. It's a fantastic crime horror hybrid kind of book. For anyone who doesn't know, who's listening, could you give us a little taste of what Senseless is?
I mean, Senseless is a story about a woman whose body is found mutilated in the desert outside of Los Angeles, and her death mimics the death of a woman who was found, a woman's body that was found the year prior in the same fashion. And the book follows three separate storylines of people throughout Los Angeles who have some tenuous nexus to the dead woman. And as the book progresses, the storylines kind of intertwine and become one tale. But it was fun writing it because it was a little bit different than my other stuff, not just in tone and in the subgenre that I'm playing. And it's got a bit of a noir feel to it. But I realized as I was doing these three separate storylines, it was very clear that I could do like three separate subgenres of dark fiction. So I've got, storyline one is about a detective, right? And it's this noir police procedural style of story. Storyline two follows a woman who is she's a novelist, and she's getting married to a Hollywood producer, and she believes her soon to be stepson may be involved somehow in this woman's death. And that I was able to play sort of in the domestic thriller field with that. And then storyline three involves a 22-year-old guy who thinks he's a housefly. And that let me play sort of up the gothic horror aspect of it. So I liked playing. I realized I could do that and have all these separate storylines all kind of have live in their own box until they all come together at the end of the book. So it was a lot of fun doing it that way. It's a little bit different than I've done in the past.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to ask about not just like structurally the differences from your previous work, but I think people who know I haven't read everything you've written, but people who know your sort of better known books know you as kind of an East Coast guy. You're a Maryland guy. What made it the right time for an LA novel?
It's funny. I tried to convince myself to not write it in LA because I've been there in and out briefly on occasion, but I've never lived there. I don't really know the ins and outs. Um, and so I tried to avoid it, but the story just demanded to be there. Just the whole flavor of it was Los Angeles, was the desert outside of Los Angeles. And so I was fortunate enough. My good friend Philip Fracassi, who is a fantastic novelist, uh, he does live out there. So there were a handful of phone calls and emails exchanged, and I said, hey, I'm looking. I need a house where a psychologist might live who caters to wealthy people and Hollywood folks. So, and not only did he come back and say, well, this is the area they'd live, but he would email me pictures. He would give me all these little ins and outs. He'd look up homes on like Redfin and say, look, here's the houses, here's what they cost. He did a lot of stuff. And I also stole a few anecdotes that he was just telling me off the cuff that some of them made their way into the book. He was priceless in having to in me getting to get the feel of LA correct. Anything that's fucked up in it is my fault. That's but yeah, I'm indebted to him. It was very generous of him to give me his time and his photos and emails.
That's amazing. That's an interesting way to write a book in a setting other than what you're used to. Um, I also just love, and like you said, you pull from all these different stylistic influences. Um, the marketing copy for this book is drawing a lot of comparisons to Zodiac. They call it Zodiac with teeth, which it does have that kind of a vibe, even though Zodiac is a San Francisco story. But uh, it reminded me of a little bit of David Lynch, like The Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, David Lynch and James Elroy. And there's some true crime sprinkled in there as there is with so many stuff now. What were your sort of setting aside the logistical things that you had to go to Philip for, what were your stylistic touchstones that you went to kind of make this feel LA?
Funny, Lynch's Mulholland Drive was sort of top of mind when I was writing it. It's interesting that you picked up on there. There's nothing really direct that says that. Again, this is just tone and atmosphere, that I use. Um, there's that. There's a wealth of Bret Easton Ellis books, where you've got like sort of these haughty, uber wealthy, nihilistic young characters in a lot of his books, and I kind of use some of that influence for some of the younger characters in the novel. Um, but it's interesting because, like I said, the book is broken down sort of these three distinct subgenres um, that I there's sort of different influence for each section of the book. I'm a friend of author Greg Giffune. He's a fantastic author, and the human fly part of that book. What sparked that and was sort of tonally adjacent was and I'm terrible at this. Oh, he wrote a book a few years ago that I read. Oh man, I can picture the cover. It's got like a woman smoking on the cover. I can't think of the title, but like, yeah, I will. I'll go through. Whenever I write something, I usually have a stack of books beside my laptop and just inspiration, like the inspiration tower, right? I just look at it, and if I ever I'm like, I lose what the tone's supposed to be. I'll flip through it, just read random paragraphs and stuff, and just gotta, kind of get hooked back in. I used to do that a lot with music when I write. Um, but as I've gotten older, I realized my concentration needs to be more narrowly focused. So I don't really have music playing too often anymore. But I do have that tower of books sitting there when I write.
It's interesting that you brought up music because one of the threads that started to run through doing this show is talking to writers who pursue other creative avenues in addition to writing. And I know you're a musician. Uh, for listeners at home, there's a wall of guitars behind Ronald as we're talking. And I've talked to other musicians and other visual artists and people who do metal smithing and all this other stuff. You mentioned not listening to music while writing, and which is something I can relate to. What does the musical side of your life give you and feed you that sort of connects back to writing, or is it just a completely different way to turn the writing brain off and focus entirely on sonic things?
I, for me, they are different, and I think that's why, as I've gotten older, um, uh, that I listen to music less and less when I write, because I do think they're kind of separate. That's not to say that I don't listen to music. I mean, when I was writing a book called Black Mouth, I had Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells on repeat in that house, and not just that, but like various circus music and stuff, just to kind of like get my head in the game. So I will do that. Uh, but really, music. I mean, writing a book is a very insular. You're in a vacuum. You're doing it yourself. You walk around. And you think everything you're thinking is in your head. You don't really have a lot of. No one else knows what you're doing, so you don't have any people to really bounce ideas off of. Um, Whereas music is this sort of communion with other artists, people in your band, where I write a lot of the music in my band, and I bring these songs to these guys and we work them out from there. I give them this husk or this skeleton of what this song should sound like, and together the other three guys and myself build this thing from the ground up. And it's such a different experience than writing a book. um so different, in fact, that the lyrics are usually the last thing I ever write for a song. It's very music based. um the only connection, I've been asked that question a lot from people. The only question, or the only connection I could really see in the two, is that I tend to write to a cadence. My writing has a certain cadence and lilt, I guess, to it, that I attribute to, sort of the mathematical way I think when I think about writing, or I'm sorry, when I think about music, like how the progression of chords and how long you have to stay on a measure, and all that stuff. So I think about that when I write, not consciously, but I can tell that I'm like, what sounds good, where the beats need to go.
It's interesting that you talk about it in terms of cadence, because the three different threads in this book are they have that they each have their own cadence and their own pace. Um, and you mentioned having a stack of inspiration stuff. Is forming you just talked about the kind of mathematical, almost musical approach to it. Is that something that you have to sit down and really think about? Like, okay, I'm writing about Detective Rennie right now, so it needs to feel like this, or I'm writing about Maureen right now, so it needs to think about the feel like this, or Toby, or is it just I know where the story's going, I'm gonna let my voice flow as it flows, and then you tighten it up later?
I mean, it's more the latter. I don't consciously think about these sort of things. I don't really know. I know a lot of writers. I don't know many of them that consciously think about doing it like that. I think it just comes naturally the way it comes. Um, and it's that cadence is sort of inherent in just my style of writing, I think. um if you want to get down more specific, when you're writing different characters, it's not just about the cadence. Obviously, it's about the language, their thoughts, how they would interpret a situation, and that colors the style of narration that you give them. A character like Toby, the kid who thinks he's a fly in Senseless. His chapters are very hallucinatory. So I know there's a ton of run-on sentences and sentences that abruptly stop, and because he's sort of he lives in this world where he's not quite sure what's real, what's not. He's constantly running and then stopping, mentally, to try to keep up with himself and with the world. And the narration for his chapters has to mimic that. Conversely, the Bill Rennie, the detective in that book, his chapters are very parochial. They're very pragmatic, because that's the kind of guy he is. Maureen, who's a writer, who in the other storyline, uh, her chapters are written the way you would think a writer would write their life. So I'm conscious of doing that, the ability to do that is just something that I hook into, because when I know who these characters are in my head, and it kind of comes naturally that way once I realize who they are. But it is certainly, there's certain distinct voices throughout. Whenever you deal with a particular character, they have their own voice.
Did any one of these three jump out first and loudest, or how did that work?
So it's funny. When I first thought of this idea, before I ever really sat down to write it, it was just the detective story. It was, this detective finds this body, it's mutilated. He's reminded of a murder that happened a year prior, and he thought that murder had been solved, or he thought there was a resolution to that murder, I guess. And now that the second body pops up, he's concerned that they're dealing with a serial killer, and he goes back and deals with the husband of the first victim, who over that past year has formed an on again, off again sort of friendship. And I liked that whole scenario, and I won't give out spoilers about that, but um, that's how the story came to me. What I don't typically do in my writing is to write stuff. I like taking basic tropes and then kind of turning them on their heads. And I'm not somebody who really would just sit down and write a police procedural thriller type, novel. So while I liked the idea of that, I said, I kept thinking something's missing, and it wasn't until I realized, what, I could tell this more as a broader tapestry. And as soon as I started thinking of that, these other character storylines popped in my head, and I really liked what they were bringing to the table, the colors that they were contributing to the story. And I'm like, you know what, this is how I want to tell this story. And then I pitched it to my agent, my editor. My agent's always wants me to be cautious. My editor's like, this sounds great, let's do it. So that's how it came about. Yeah.
It's a fantastic book, and I hope everyone picks it up. There is a scene in this novel that I will not give anyone the context for, because it's important that you discover it yourself. But Toby refers to a character called the Spider, and in one scene you finally meet the Spider, and it is not an overtly horror scene, I would say, but it's one of the most unsettling things that I've read in quite a while. It's fantastic stuff. But now I want to get over to our topic for today, because this is an exciting one. Um, when I started this show, there were a few. There was kind of a list of, like, okay, these are the ones that people. I know someone's going to pick this. These are the essentials. These are the headliners, if you will. And so Ronald, when I reached out about this, picked Toby Hooper and Steven Spielberg's 1982 classic haunted house masterpiece, Poltergeist, which is still an incredible experience. I would love to go back and see this movie again for the first time. What was your first experience with Poltergeist like?
It's funny. I can't remember the first time I actually watched the movie front to back. Um, but I remember being a kid and being at like my uncle's house for like some family event or wherever, and it was on TV. And I remember catching it may not have even been the movie. It might have been the trailer. I don't even remember, but I remember just seeing flashes of her on the at the TV, and something about it just totally stuck in my head. The fact that I can even recall this memory. So I don't really remember when I first watched the movie, but I had that memory of seeing it, like it on this TV in my uncle's house, and just kind of watching it from the corner of a doorway, and like with one eye.
That's Poltergeist is one of those movies that has been so much a part of pop culture for so long. I think my experience was similar, where I saw clips of Poltergeist before I ever saw Poltergeist. I remember the American Film Institute did a TV special about the 100 most thrilling American movies, and they had clips from Poltergeist completely out of sequence, and it freaked me out because I had no. So, were you a horror kid, or was it something you came to later?
was, but I was scared of everything as a kid. So I was one of those kids that were like terrified of even if it wasn't horror, every little thing scared the shit out of me. And I, but like most kids, what scares you also kind of entices you and piques your curiosity. And I think that's where I got it. And everything, the movies I liked, the books once I was a little older, the books I started to read, stuff like that. It always had a dark bend to it. I was always, because it did frighten me a little bit. And I liked that. So yeah, I mean, but I was terrified of everything when I was a kid.
Yeah, same. This is we come back to this on the show a lot, but I was not allowed near that stuff, and which meant that any little glimpse into that world that I got was absolutely devastating to me, and I had no idea how to really process it because I didn't know the context. And so I remember that feeling of being repulsed and yet enticed. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so like Stephen King novels were always laying around somebody's house somewhere. They were at the grocery store on the book racks next to the magazines, and I would always go over and just look at them. Like, what's in there? What's actually in there that's going to get me? Um and it just made it that much more fun when I finally started to read them and go, "Oh, yeah, this is cool." So, what when when you finally did gain like a full context for what this movie is, um what about it like sank into you and made it an essential part of you as a fan and a creator?
My love for this movie has only increased over the years as I've gotten older, and I think a lot of it is nostalgia. I mean, it just I'm an unapologetic Spielberg fan. Like his early works, I think they're fantastic. And I just love the nostalgia flavor of that. Despite some of the bleak shit that I write, I am kind of a sentimentalist, so I appreciate his storytelling. Um, and I think this movie just epitomizes, like, he goes dark, right? It's his scariest kind of thing at the time, but it's got all the Spielberg hallmarks to it. It also really just encompasses that early '80s mentality of, you know consumerism, and trying, these little, everybody wants to live in a cookie cutter subdivision, and you know the dad reading the book about, Ronald Reagan while they're smoking pot in bed. There's such an honesty of the time in that movie that I find it's like weirdly charming. I don't know. There's something great about it, but it's also, for me, who I write a lot of stuff that is very character driven. I write a lot of stuff that's I like to imbue some heart into it. A lot of stuff about families, relationships, and this movie epitomizes that. It's really the ultimate haunted house movie. It's the ultimate family drama. It's probably the only haunted house movie I could think of where there's a reason these people don't just pick up and leave the house. It's so self-contained. It's brilliant. Um, and it's just, I don't know, everything about it, from the tone of it, the music, don't I mean, his score is just fantastic. I don't know, I can just go on and on. I'd rather talk about this movie than my books, so yeah.
Well, I this was interesting because I didn't rewatch this because you were coming on the show. I rewatched this because I'm writing a haunted house novel. So like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I threw on Poltergeist just to kind of have like what's a classic of the haunted house genre. And I threw it on, and it's probably the 10th or 11th time I've seen it. And you were talking about the family thing, and I've written about this before somewhere, I think. But what the secret sauce of Poltergeist to me is just how detail oriented and cozy it gets in establishing that like these are nice people just trying to live a nice life. There is so much relatability in that family. And if you grew up in the 80s and you see the decor of that house, you're just like, oh, This is exactly, yeah, I feel everything about this, and the dog getting the potato chip bag and carrying it out of the room, and the static on the TV, which, I'm old enough to remember when, yeah, local TV stations would just shut off at 2 a.m. and you'd just have static. Uh, and even like the bit near the beginning where they realize that their neighbor's remote control affects their TV, and so they have to argue with their neighbor because they want to watch the football game. It's so wonderful, and it builds this wonderful like suburban universe, which, as someone who's written novels about like smaller towns and smaller communities, I think is something I see a lot recurring in your work, and it all does it so efficiently. Like it is not one of those horror films that's going to make you wait 45 minutes until the scary thing happens. It is off like a rocket, but it never loses that like sense of, oh no, we're just a family trying to get through whatever this is. I love that about it.
Everything you just said, I agree with. I love and actually some people, I watch Poltergeist every Halloween, and as my kids got older, I'd make them watch it with me. And it's funny to watch these movies that I've loved when I was younger through the eyes of my kids, where I do realize they're much slower paced than what they're used to. Um, Gently, I even showed like my 10-year-old daughter. She was like on this Jaws kick. She wanted to see Jaws. I showed her Jaws. She's like, it wasn't that scary. He only eats like three people. I'm like, wow, I guess you're right, kid. That way. But so you do see it a little bit differently. But my favorite part of Poltergeist is like that first 45 minutes where it's just the family and the neighborhood, and it's building this. And I love that slow cranking dread, vibe that in anything. But this movie does it really well. All the stuff you said about just the decor of the house, you could almost smell it. If you're gonna walk on that shag carpet, there's little beads and potato chip crumbs in there that your feet are gonna touch. Every aspect of that. I also really love how it really presents. If this were to happen in real life, it really like it handles it genuinely. I mean, the scene where Steven, the father, comes home from work and he's dragging the pails up the driveway, and Diane runs out and grabs him and drags him in the house, and he's like pulling these garbage pails with him, and she's showing him the chair sliding across the kitchen floor, and she's excited about it, and I'm like, you know what? 99.9% of people would have made her scared, right? But I'm like, you know what? I can see that scene rings so true, you know, and just I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Everything you just said. But yeah, see how excited I get? We should just watch that now.
It's yeah, we'll do a commentary track for Poltergeist. We'll just watch it and talk through it. But yeah, the chairs are wonderful. First of all, I love the visual effect of the first when the chairs and all end up on the table, because that is classic like seat of your pants cheap filmmaking. It is literally just like, okay, we're gonna pan away for 5 seconds. Every stagehand we can get, come in here. Every crew member we can get, come in here and stack these chairs, and then get out of the room. It's amazing how, and I love how quick, like you said, I love how,
Matthew, if you look closely in that scene, you can see the crew in the reflection of the toaster on the counter
yeah,
running with the chairs. Yeah, it's
yes,
awesome.
they have to slip in and slip out really really
Yeah.
fast, and it's a beautiful effect. But I love the delight that oh gosh, I'm gonna forget the character's name. I thought it Diane Freeling is
Mhm.
Joe Beth Williams' character. That Diane takes in like, wait, we have ghosts that can push chairs around? That's amazing.
It's awesome.
It's like she has found a new feature to her dream home, and she's just showing it off like, look what our house can do. Isn't this amazing? And then I think on this rewatch, one of my favorite things that stuck out to me is how matter of fact it all becomes once it starts to kick in, because you have that scene where the famous they're here scene, and you have the scene where Carol Ann gets pulled into the TV, and the tree outside goes crazy and there's a storm and they're all like fighting for their lives, and then everything settles down and they realize that their daughter is gone, but they can't easily explain why their daughter is gone. And then they call the paranormal investigators and they literally are just like, yeah, so we got this room that we have to keep shut now because everything in it floats. And the paranormal investigators are like, yeah, whatever. Okay, let's go. Let's go look at this. And everything in it, it's so.
Love it. It's and let's not overlook the comedic aspect of some of those scenes. I mean,
Yeah, it's
they're
funny.
they're very dry, but it's fun. Like when he brings them, and they're like right outside that door, and one of the investigators is telling Stephen Freeling, and he's like, we had a. There was one place we were at where there was this Matchbox car, and it rolled across the floor, and the video footage, and it was, the video footage was like at 13 and a half hours. He goes, 13 hours for, he goes, to film the car rolling across the floor. He's like, oh, and he opens the door and all this shit's flying around. It's great.
It's it's so good. And Stephen, again, that like I notice, I feel like I almost latch on to a different character every time I watch Poltergeist. Sometimes I'm just there for Zelda Rubinstein, who is so amazing. And other times it's Joe Beth Williams. Other times it's someone else. But this last watch, I was really into Stephen Freeling, and it's probably, if I do pop psychology on myself, it's probably because I think this was the first time I watched it since I became a dad. So I think I was just sort of like, okay, dad is my guy. I love how exhausted he is and how just like completely overwhelmed by the reality of this situation he is. And you were talking about how funny the movie is. I love the moment when they finally decide to bring in Tangina, which is Zelda Rubinstein's character, the spirit medium, and she comes in the house and she's walking around
I know
and
where you're going.
she's like doing her little assessment, and he immediately is like, I'm trying to get her to read my mind and she can't. And I love that this dude has been through, okay, look, I accept that my daughter got taken by TV static. I accept that there is a room in my house where everything floats, but I call bullshit on this lady. This lady is full of shit. I don't know what
Right?
she's trying to. It's just such a like. I mean, you mentioned it being this showcase for that particular period in America, and it has, I mean, there are definitely echoes of it in the way that we look at America now, where I can absolutely see some like upper middle class guy who finds out like, okay, so my daughter has been kidnapped by ghosts. All right. But seriously, you're gonna let this weird lady who thinks she's psychic fix it? That doesn't make any sense. It's so great. It's such a and I want to make sure to talk about Toby Hooper here, because there is
Oh, there's a lot of stuff we could talk about behind the scenes with this movie, but yeah.
yeah, well, it's one of those things, like it's directed by Toby Hooper, produced by Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg pitched the story, and apparently the original collaboration thing was that Spielberg wanted to do another Alien movie. He wanted to do like Close Encounters 2. And there's all this sort of lore about Spielberg wanting to make like a dark, scary alien movie as opposed to the more hopeful alien movies he ended up making. Which I guess War of the Worlds finally scratched that itch for him, maybe. But
Hmm.
Hooper was like, I did some sci-fi stuff already. I Can we do like a ghost story or something? And so Spielberg went off and cooked up this concept, and Spielberg was on set a lot, and his fingerprints are all over this movie, as we've discussed. But I personally think that those scenes, once the paranormal investigators show up and things start to kick into like high ghost gear with the like the face peeling scene, the scene where the guy thinks his face is coming off, that to me is 100% Toby Hooper. So what do you think about the Hooper Spielberg balance in this movie?
Matthew, I like you a lot, so I didn't want to have to argue with you on this podcast. But I think this movie is without a doubt 100%. And I like Toby Hooper, but it is without a doubt Steven Spielberg directed this movie. Without a doubt. I think he everything from the camera angles, the eye lights on the characters, the panning, all the nuances of the dog pulling the potato chip, the kids fighting at the kitchen table, the dialogue bleeding on top of it, that is all Spielberg Americana. I mean, it's I I don't know. I think I don't know. It almost like when I pick my favorite Spielberg movie, it's almost always Poltergeist, even though arguably they say he doesn't direct it, because it seems so much of his style there. And it is. It's like it's a scarier ET, even though ET scared the shit out of me when I was a kid too. But but
Well,
no,
it
my vote's for Spielberg.
it's hard to argue that like I think whether you believe that Spielberg shadow directed it or that Hooper directed it and Spielberg was just always there giving notes or something, it's hard to argue against like the stylistic influence because like if you watch and again I love Toby Hooper. I live in Texas Chainsaw Massacre country, so I I uh I love all that dude's stuff, but Toby Hooper and especially Toby Hooper in the 80s had a very, very frenetic quality to the way that he made films. And some of that was probably cocaine, and some of that was just Toby Hooper, because it's right there in, if you watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Eaten Alive and movies like that, he just has that sort of off the rails style. And so this movie is so much more restrained and graceful. Matthew Leonetti shot it, and Michael Kahn
Yes.
edited it. Michael Kahn, who cut a lot of Spielberg's movies, uh, edited it, and it has that sort of graceful,
Get I
glidey,
forget
long
what
take.
Leonetti had a stance on who all the cast and crew was all asked who directed the movie. Leonetti had a pretty definitive uh stance on it, and frankly I can't remember which way just sitting here now which way he went. um but no, look, it, it, I think we could all agree that Spielberg's involvement with Poltergeist was much more than a 1/3 of the screenwriting team and a producer would ever have on set of any movie. And I don't here I like Toby Hooper too, and I like all his other stuff, but the way I like when I see Toby Hooper's other films, I'm like, Toby Hooper wouldn't even watch Poltergeist. I don't think. I don't know. I hate to be hard on the guy.
Well, no, I think that this was during a, let's just call it an interesting creative period for Toby Hooper. I think that having Spielberg there, and I mean, even Spielberg, I think in his sort of, because there was like literally a Directors Guild investigation into what happened here. And it ended up with, Hooper got the sole directing credit and Spielberg was the producer. But Spielberg called it a unique creative relationship. He didn't outright say like, yeah, no, I was a producer. He said we had an interesting working relationship. So I do think that he was probably there, if not all the time, then a good portion of the time, making things more Spielbergian and maybe saying like, hey, let that shot go a little longer, because or try to track up the staircase on this, try to do this, try to do that. But I still cling
Cup of
to
coffee, Toby.
I still cling to like the idea that once the ghost stuff, like the I feel like the last third of this movie, I think the first act of this movie feels way more Spielberg than Hooper. and in the middle it starts to mesh, and then the third act, with a few exceptions, feels more Hooper than Spielberg to me, because the way that those skeletons come up out of the pool and the way that that is shot and how confrontational that is. I think The Clown is probably more Spielberg because that is more about tension than it is about release. But I think the skeletons in the pool, the face peeling off, the weird one of my favorite shots in the movie, which I'm sure Spielberg had a hand in designing, but it feels like Hooper shot it, where they're trying to get Carol Ann back, and Steven starts pulling on the rope too quickly because he thinks he's losing his wife and daughter, and that giant fucking skull thing just comes out of the closet.
Yeah.
That feels very Tobe Hooper to me. Which this brings me to another thing I love about this film is it is so unrestrained in the way that it depicts this haunting. It is it very much like, if anyone out there hasn't seen Poltergeist and you've seen Insidious, Insidious does a similar thing, not quite as well, although I do love Insidious, where they are just throwing fucking everything at you. They are just and I feel like so many haunted house movies get very, very analytical about the way that their ghosts work. They get very like, and novels too, where it's like it can only work this specific way because it's about this one specific thing that happened. And if I deviate from that, I'm breaking the logic of my story. And Poltergeist, they're just like, yeah, what if a giant skull just came out of the door and screamed in
That's
Craig T.
right.
Nelson's face? And I love it for that. I love that it is just, once that prologue sequence has sort of come and gone, it is like almost 2 hours of, here is the freakiest shit we could think of and still get a PG rating. I love it.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite ghost or scare? I know you literally, like, again, you can't see Ronald right now, but he has the actual clown doll from Poltergeist on his couch behind him.
Can I shake the bells? I don't know. I don't know if that
Oh my
translated
gosh.
well. Yeah, but it rattles. Yeah, it's scary as shit.
Oh man. Um, this is very funny because when Josh Malloran was here, he had a Chucky doll sitting right behind him. And which we didn't even talk about Child's Play, but he had that, and you've got the Poltergeist doll. Um, so is the clown your favorite? Do you have another favorite moment in term? What's your favorite scare from Poltergeist?
Scare. I mean, probably younger me would have been. Like I said, I can't remember when I first saw the full movie all the way front to back. Clowns, dolls, any of those things becoming like, so alive, scary. But my favorite scare is sort of an anti-scare in the movie. I love when, and it does involve the clown, but I love when the tree scene happens and they rescue Robbie and they come back into the house and they're looking for Carol Ann and they go in the closet and they think she's covered in a blanket, like not moving at the back of the closet, and they think she's dead, right? And they're crying and they pull this thing down and it's the clown doll, right? It's not her. And so it's sort of like an anti-scare, like you get that relief, but the second after that relief comes, you go, well, where the hell is she then? What happened? And so it's such a really neat, I don't know what you would call it. It's like the opposite of a jump scare, right? It's almost a
Yeah,
little cerebral. Yeah, it's very well done.
that also feels like a very Spielbergian moment. I mean, the same year we had the whole like ET hiding in the closet scene, and they feel like parallels to me
Yeah.
in different
Or look
genres.
earlier to like that scene in Close Encounters with the boy with all the toys start, before he's taken, and the mother. There's a lot of that, in that scene.
That scene in Close Encounters with the
That's clearly the most terrifying in that movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
with the little boy opening the door and it's just like completely
Yeah,
orange light outside. Yeah, that's an
it's great.
amazing sequence. Um, I think my favorite, I don't know, I love the giant screaming skull. I love that weird bird, bat,
Yeah, there's
dragon
something with like big
thing that,
legs. I remember that
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
but I think it is still and it has nothing to do with the reality that they were actual skeletons. I just
Mhm.
think the skeletons in the pool is so effective because at that point the family has been pushed to their absolute limit, and Diane is so tired and so just like trying to make sure all of her kids get out of this alive. And on top of everything else, she falls in the pool and skeletons come out, and they're so effective looking and so cruddy and
They
gross.
were they were very effective. They were real.
Yeah, they
So
were real. They were real skeletons, which apparently this has nothing to do with Poltergeist, but apparently I read I was doing research for a thing and I read that the skeleton that makes up the creep in Creep Show was also a real skeleton. So in the 80s, they were just ordering real human skeletons and putting them in
they
everything.
said that they were just cheaper to get real ones than to make them. So, and
Yeah,
hey, save a buck, right? I
but
guess.
I would not be opposed when I finally go to like instead of donating my body to science, if I could donate my body to horror and I
To
could just
Hollywood, you
be
become a star.
yeah, I could can skeletons get a SAG card? I don't know, but like just put me in a prop room and then anytime you need a skeleton, just trot me out and dress me up, put make me a Grim Reaper, whatever you need. I'm
See
happy
what the
to
big deal is.
I'm happy to do it. Um so we've talked a lot about um the family vibes and how well the emotional connections in this movie work when the horror kicks in, which is a key to a lot of horror, right? You're scared because you care about the people. Um, is this something that you find yourself? I mean, this is obviously reflective in your work, but have you ever been working on any of your novels and thought like, oh, this is like Poltergeist? Because I've had different answers from guests about this, where some will say, oh yeah, I thought about that specific scene from that specific movie while I was writing this novel, and others are like, I mean, maybe now that you mention it, but so what? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. I've written a few, ghost type books. I don't ever think I thought specifically of Poltergeist. There's always you get to a scene where you're doing something, and you're like, oh, this is sort of like from that movie, or and so then what you do is you try to come up with a way to make it different, or less, derivative or whatever. I don't know if I've ever used anything directly from Poltergeist, or even thought about it when I was doing it. It's I don't know. I don't think so.
But
Yeah.
the whole like, do you feel like you got the sort of uh family community sort of
So
thing?
I'll
Is
say
that
this tonally, yeah, tonally, I think it's all I'm stealing it all because I
yeah?
love that tone. Not specific scenes or anything, but just yeah, that whole kind of 1980s nuclear family. This is what it looks like kind of vibe. Um, there's also I love the idea in Poltergeist that you don't know this family before this stuff happens, right? But things that they say to each other paint a bigger picture of who they used to be. There's a scene where, like, it's the kitchen scene where the chair's going across the floor, and Diane goes to Steven and she's like, I want you to think back to when you had an open mind and you used to be cool and receptive. And in that one scene, you're like, yeah, these two were like some pot smoking hippies back in the day having a good time. But now he's 1982, got to go to work, be a dad guy now, and he's kind of lost touch with the guy he used to be. All of that gets you could pick up all of that based on her one comment with this dude. So stuff like that I really like. You don't have to explain it, but it's all right there, just in a one line of dialogue.
Well, this takes me back to we didn't really talk about it in depth, but the more that you go back and watch Poltergeist, if you understand anything about like what the 80s were like in America, it is whether purposefully or not, it is this really interesting concept, really interesting comment rather on that sort of Reagan era ideal of this is in the same way that so many horror films of like the 60s and 70s were sort of a reaction to first the sort of baby boomer white picket fence America, which we're talking about David Lynch. There's a lot of that in his stuff. And then to like post Vietnam America. This is very much about something that also recurs to your work, which is like the evil under the surface of what should be this very comfortable existence. And I think that that is a key to why the movie holds up so well, because yet even though like Reagan is directly invoked by that book that Stephen is reading, it very much is like, yeah, this is what you think you're buying your dream house, but the developers cut corners and now you're living atop a burial ground and everybody's coming out to kill you. um
I think really, and what you're right, and I think even beyond that is what Spielberg did was the same thing that Stephen King did. Starting with Salem's Lot, is to take the gothic horror element from haunted houses are always in castles in Europe somewhere, right? And now we're bringing it to small town America, and that's what both of them did in all of their movies and their books. And it became something so accessible for us as a culture, as a citizenship or citizenry or whatever you want to call it, we were able to for the first time relate to stuff like that. And I thought it's those things are products of their time, and it's so um accessible, I think. And I could argue. I got friends of mine who every time I talk about Poltergeist, they're like, Malfi, you write horror novels. That's the scariest. That's your favorite horror movie. Come on, there's a million other. I'm like, no, man, you don't get it. It really is, and it's also. I don't think there's a better '80s movie that anyone really can relate to who grew up in that generation, because look, you could say Terminator, you could say Back to the Future, that's all fine, but none of us grew up doing any of those things. We certainly grew up in a house riding bikes around a neighborhood, and we know every little element that movie shows us, and I think that's why I relate to that the most.
I hadn't really thought of it this way, but I Halloween is my favorite horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that movie came out 8 years before I was born, but it has that. I grew up in a very rural, small town type environment, and the idea that, oh, there's a guy in a mask walking around killing people, and no one is really prepared for it because this just isn't that kind of town. I could relate to that so closely. Uh, that yeah, it's is it the scariest horror movie ever made? No, but I don't necessarily go to the horror movies I love most to be absolutely terrified. If I want that, I can go watch something like Skinamarink or Martyrs, or there's obviously you can go as far and as gross and as intense as you want with horror films, but it really is about like the I can imagine being a teenager in a small town being chased by a maniac that the adults around me don't really take seriously. So yeah, that is a big part of the allure of Poltergeist, because it does such a good job of building that little there is a thing. Anyone who grew up in a family like the Freeling family knows that there is a thing that happens when you go home at night and the street lights come on and you're all just in your house, where it becomes your own little universe. It's its own little microcosm of that's your world, and something like this suddenly upsetting that world is so frightening.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's that facade of safety, and I think that's that's sort of metaphoric for the 80s, this whole, everything's perfect and fine on the surface and everything's great, but here we are, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. Now you make me want to watch this movie tonight.
Man, I am close to a rewatch too, I think. So now that we both want to go watch Poltergeist, uh before we let you go, Ronald, could you please let people know where to find you online and what you've got coming up?
I mean, my website is ronaldmalfi.com. You can find me on all the social media platforms that are out there. I try to keep them updated. And my book tour for Senseless actually just started this past weekend. And I will be in various places throughout the country well into November, I want to say. So I try to keep my social media stuff updated with where I'm going to be. Can't even remember off the top of my head where the next stop is, but look me up on there, and you could see where I'm going to be. And if I'm in your neighborhood, come on out and grab a book, and we can have a beer, and we can talk about Poltergeist.
Absolutely. If you're on Toby Hooper's side, go find Ronald at an event and yell at him about Toby Hooper. But also buy Senseless because it's great, and we want to support more Ronald Malfi books. Ronald Malfi has been our guest. Ronald, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast.
Thanks once again to Ronald Malfi for being on the show. Senseless is available April 15th, wherever books are sold. Make sure you pick that up. It's a fantastic book. Go follow Ronald on all of his socials. Keep track of everything he's got going on. If you want to keep track of everything we've got going on, you should also follow us on socials. We are mostly posting on Blue Sky at the moment. You will find us there at scareshapedus.bsky.social. We're also on Facebook. We're the Scares That Shaped Us over there. We're also the Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If you prefer to get your podcast through YouTube, we've got you covered. Go over there, smash that subscribe button. You can also email me. We are at scares@gmail.com. If you have a question, a suggestion, an idea for a future episode, whatever you want, happy to hear from everybody. We will be back next week, April 16th, with a brand new episode. Our guest will be the one, the only Chuck Wendig. We are going to talk to Chuck about his new novel, The Staircase in the Woods, and we're going to talk about one of the great horror, sci-fi, fantasy, crazy genre novels of the 1980s, Robert McCammon's Swan Song. It's a really fun talk. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I did. Again, that will be out April 16th at noon Central. That does it for me this week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.